It is the spring of 1942. In North Africa, British and German forces are locked in a desert war that will kill hundreds of thousands. In the Soviet Union, the Eastern Front is consuming entire armies. In the Pacific, the United States is still reeling from Pearl Harbor. The world is at war in a way it has never been before: total, industrial, ideological. In Basel, Switzerland, a small group of men in dark suits arrive at a handsome stone building near the city center. They carry briefcases. They are shown to a conference room. They sit down together around a polished table. Some of them represent the central banks of nations currently at war with each other. One represents the Bank of England. One represents the Federal Reserve. One represents the Reichsbank, the central bank of Nazi Germany. They do not discuss the war. They discuss interest rates, gold transfers, and the quarterly accounts of the institution they jointly govern. Then they adjourn, shake hands, and return to their respective countries. The institution they have just governed is called the Bank for International Settlements. It is still open today. There is a version of the Second World War that most people know, the version of absolute moral stakes, of clear sides, of a world that recognized evil and moved slowly at enormous cost to destroy it. That version is true, and it is incomplete. Because running beneath the surface of that war, beneath the idealism and the sacrifice and the stated conviction that this was a fight for civilization itself, was a financial system that did not recognize sides, that processed transactions between enemies, that accepted gold that had been stripped from the bodies of people being murdered in industrial quantities, and that was governed, throughout the war, by men from both sides of the conflict sitting in the same room. This is the story of the Bank for International Settlements, and it is a story about what money does when it is given enough institutional protection to operate beyond the reach of conscience. The Bank for International Settlements was founded in 1930 with a purpose that was, on its surface, entirely reasonable. The First World War had left Europe drowning in a web of war debts and reparations payments so complex that no bilateral negotiation could manage them. Germany owed reparations to France and Britain. Britain and France owed war debts to the United States. The flows of money required to service these obligations crossed so many borders, involved so many currencies, and required so many simultaneous transactions that an intermediary institution, a bank for central banks, seemed like a practical solution. The BIS was established by an international agreement signed in The Hague in 1930. Its founding members included the central banks of England, France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, and Japan, along with a consortium of American commercial banks. It was headquartered in Basel, chosen for its neutrality, its Central European location, and the discretion Switzerland had long offered to financial institutions that preferred to operate without excessive scrutiny. From the beginning, the BIS was designed to be different from ordinary institutions. Its charter granted it extraordinary protections. Its premises were inviolable, immune from search or seizure by Swiss authorities. Its communications were privileged. Its staff held diplomatic immunity. Its assets could not be seized even in wartime. The architects of the institution had built, deliberately and carefully, a financial entity that sat above the jurisdiction of any single nation, including the nations at war. Through the 1930s, as Europe moved toward catastrophe, the BIS continued its technical work, managing gold transfers, facilitating central bank coordination, providing a forum for monetary policy discussion. But the politics were coming. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, the Reichsbank remained a member of the BIS in good standing. When Germany began rearming in violation of the Versailles Treaty, the Reichsbank remained a member. When Germany annexed Austria in 1938, the BIS absorbed the Austrian central bank's gold reserves into its accounts without objection. And when war came in September 1939, the BIS did not close. It kept its doors open and its books running. The man who ran the BIS through the war years was an American. His name was Thomas McKittrick. He was a Boston-born banker, Harvard-educated, deeply connected to the international financial establishment, and he had been appointed president of the BIS in 1940, after the war had already begun. The central problem was gold. Nazi Germany, from the earliest days of its expansion, had been systematically looting the gold reserves of every country it occupied. When German forces entered Prague in March 1939, the Reichsbank immediately demanded that the Bank of England transfer the gold held in London on behalf of the Czech National Bank to a Reichsbank account at the BIS. The Bank of England complied. Approximately $9 million worth of Czech gold, the financial reserves of a nation that had just been erased, moved into Nazi hands through the BIS's books. This transaction caused a brief scandal in the British press. Questions were asked in Parliament. The Bank of England offered technical explanations about the contractual obligations of correspondent banking. The story faded. It was the first of many. As the war expanded and German occupation spread across Europe, the BIS continued to serve as a conduit through which looted gold could be legitimized. Gold seized from the central banks of occupied nations, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Yugoslavia, passed through BIS accounts. More disturbingly, gold began to arrive from sources that defied any conventional banking explanation. In 1942, the Reichsbank began melting down gold that had been confiscated not from central bank vaults but from individuals, from the possessions of concentration camp prisoners. Rings, eyeglass frames, dental fillings. This metal was recast into standard gold bars, stamped with the Reichsbank eagle and a date, and deposited through the Swiss National Bank into accounts at the BIS. The dating on some of these bars would later become a subject of forensic investigation, because some bore dates from years after the original Reichsbank gold had been exhausted, making their provenance unmistakable to anyone who looked carefully. The BIS accepted them. McKittrick maintained regular contact with German banking officials throughout the war. He traveled to Berlin at least once after American entry into the conflict. He met with Reichsbank President Walther Funk, who would later be convicted of war crimes at Nuremberg. He maintained that these contacts were necessary to protect the institution's neutrality and the interests of its allied member banks. Not everyone accepted this explanation. In July 1944, representatives of 44 Allied nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The purpose of the conference was to design the post-war international monetary system, to build, from scratch, the financial architecture that would govern the world after Nazi Germany was defeated. It produced the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the framework of fixed exchange rates that would structure the global economy for the next 3 decades. It also produced the most direct challenge the BIS had ever faced. A Norwegian economist named Wilhelm Kaelhau introduced a resolution calling for the liquidation of the bank for international settlements at the earliest possible moment. The resolution was supported by Harry Dexter White, the senior American Treasury official and the most powerful individual at the conference. White had been investigating the BIS's wartime activities and had concluded that the institution had functioned as a vehicle for Nazi gold laundering. He wanted it shut down. The resolution passed. 44 nations voted to dissolve the BIS. It was never implemented. In the months following Bretton Woods, the central banking establishment, led by the Bank of England, quietly worked to reverse the resolution. The argument made was technical and institutional. The BIS performed functions that the new IMF was not yet equipped to handle, that liquidating it would create disruption in the international payment system, that its closure could be reconsidered once the new post-war institutions were fully operational. Even John Maynard Keynes, the most influential economist of the 20th century, the intellectual architect of much of the Bretton Woods framework itself, shifted his position in the aftermath and worked to preserve the institution. The BIS survived. McKittrick left the presidency in 1946 and returned to American banking, eventually becoming a vice president of Chase Manhattan Bank. He was never charged with any crime. No BIS official was ever prosecuted for the institution's wartime conduct. A post-war investigation by the Allied governments recovered some of the looted gold, but the portion recovered represented a fraction of what had moved through the institution's books during the war years. In 1948, the Bretton Woods resolution calling for the BIS's liquidation was formally rescinded. The institution continued. The Bank for International Settlements today occupies a striking modernist tower in Basel, a circular glass and concrete structure that looks nothing like the discreet stone building of the war years, and everything like what it has become: a permanent, confident, architecturally assertive institution that has long since stopped worrying about its own survival. It hosts the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, which sets the capital adequacy standards that govern banks in over 100 countries. It holds the accounts of over 60 central banks. Every 2 months, the governors of the world's most powerful central banks travel to Basel for meetings that are closed to the press, closed to governments, and closed to the public. The BIS remains, as it was designed to be in 1930, an institution that operates above the jurisdiction of any single nation. Its wartime conduct was not fully examined until the 1990s, when historians pieced together what had happened from archives that had only recently become accessible. The Swiss National Bank issued a formal apology in 1997 for its role in processing Nazi gold. The BIS itself has never issued one. There is a question that the story of the BIS poses that goes beyond the institution itself. It is a question about the nature of financial infrastructure, about what happens when the pipes through which money flows are given enough legal protection, enough technical complexity, enough institutional prestige that they become effectively immune to the moral demands of the moment. The men who ran the BIS during the war were not, by most accounts, ideological Nazis. They were bankers. They believed, with the sincere conviction of their professional class, that the maintenance of the international financial system was a value that transcended the political conflicts of the moment. That keeping the institution running, keeping the gold moving, keeping the accounts balanced, keeping the meetings civil, served a long-term good that outweighed the short-term moral costs. They were wrong. But the institutional logic that produced their decisions did not die with the war. It is the same logic that allows financial systems to process the proceeds of corruption, the assets of sanctioned states, the wealth of individuals whose fortunes were built on violence, because the system's first obligation is always to its own continuity. In Basel, the tower still stands, the meetings still happen, the doors are still closed,